Hi, I'm Yaakov Horowitz, and welcome to our live. I'm going to have a one-way conversation with fathers, men who are withholding Gittin from their wives. I've written many harsh things over the years about this subject. They're all out there. You can see what I've written in the past. But I have spoken personally to many men who are in situations like that, not necessarily withholding Gittin, but who are in very challenging divorce situations. I'm a straight shooter. I speak my mind. And I'm going to speak my mind now also. When people come to me for advice, I treat them, no matter what they've done, who they are, I treat them with respect. And I plan on doing the same here. Just some context, like why am I getting involved here and what's my skin in the game? So I've been an advocate for children all my life. I've been in Jewish education for over 40 years. I've also worked with teens at risk and kids in recovery and all sorts of heartache and challenges. And I've seen a lot in my life, and I would like to share some of that with you. Now, if you're watching this now, if somebody sent it to you, if you're watching a video, every single situation is different. What they have all in common in situations like this is that there's an incredible amount of heartache on all sides. Divorce, dissolving a marriage wasn't plan A. It's plan B, C, or D. That's just the way it is. But I do believe that both parents, especially in this specific case, the husbands, because you're the ones who would give the get, do have a great deal of agency here. I personally believe in my heart of hearts that the best thing to do, it may be too late in this case, in your case, I don't know. But I've always felt, I feel with every fiber in my body, that the best thing to do in situations when parents divorce is to find a mediator. And mediator, arbitration means that you go to a person, that you and your spouse go together to a person, and you give that person the right to make a final decision. That's called arbitration. Some people are reluctant to do arbitration because now you have to do what that person wants you to, says. In other words, you gave over the ruling to them. Mediation is where people sit down with both parties and try to work it out. You know what I found over the years? That in any disputes, people generally, both sides, do far better mediating things and trying to work it out. I know every person thinks that their situation is different, and some are. Sometimes you don't have a partner on the other side. I'm aware of that, and I'm going to talk about that. I've had dozens and dozens of fathers who've come to me over the years and told me that my wife is withholding custody, my wife accused me of abuse, my wife isn't letting me see the children. I'll tell you what I honestly told them, and judge it as you will. Life has taught me that when two parties want to work it out, they can work it out. It's complicated. Everybody has to give something. A good negotiation, they say, is when both sides are a little bit unhappy or very unhappy. That's just the way it is. But when you're mediating things, you get to sit down and work it out. So if that's even an option, to find a wise person, what do you do now? If you can find a wise person that both people respect, I would encourage you to do this. People will tell you that that rich people are more likely to fight, poor people are more likely to fight, moderate income people. I've seen people fight over hundreds of millions of dollars. And honestly, I was involved. I promise you this is true. I was about 22, 23 years old. There was a husband who didn't give a get in the Brooklyn area. He hadn't given a get for years. And the rabbis came to him. I was a young kid. I was 22, 23 years old. And this fellow said, he saw me once, I don't know, this guy said that he trusts me. And they asked me to come in and settle things. He hadn't given a get in years. We worked it, honestly, I promise you this is true. We worked it out in a couple of hours. You know what they were arguing about? Newspapers. I promise you, there was a stack of old newspapers that they were dividing up. And I treated them both with respect. We worked it out. He gave the get. That was it. So I plead with you to try to work this out. There's no way that you're thinking rationally about it. There's no way that your spouse is thinking rationally. How could you think rationally about this? This is your life. This is your future. This is not what you planned on. There's probably bad history, probably on both sides, perhaps not. But every situation is different. When people come and discuss it with me, the first thing I ask them is, who's the customer? And I really encourage you to think about this. Who's the customer here? Who are we trying to service? It's a very fair question. And you could say, I ran an agency called Project Yes for 20 years. We did a lot of work with teens at risk. And we try to craft a mission statement. This is important. It's not semantics. It's not just words. We were crafting a mission statement. What do we do? And the first question, I brought in a professional to help us through this. And he said, who's your customer? And we looked around. So the customer could have been children. It could have been their parents. It could have been God. It could have been the Rosh Yeshiva of the Aguda. I was a department head in Agudas Yisrael. Project Yes was a division of the Aguda. So who's the customer? You know what we came up with? Working with families on behalf of their children. That was the tagline of our organization for over 15 years. Working with families, because we did work with, we didn't work with kids much. We had a mentoring program, but most of the work was with parents. So working with parents on behalf of their children. And I can almost promise you that if you forget your spouse for a moment, if you really think about this and you say, who is the customer here? And you come, you, not your spouse, hopefully both of you. I'm speaking to fathers, not to husbands. If you sit down, go for a walk, really think it over and say, who is the customer here? Who are we trying to help here as we're getting divorced? I could almost guarantee you that if both of you say that we're going to try to help the children, they should be first and foremost. It will be an entirely different situation. And that's your responsibility. Nobody else's. It's not your parents' responsibility. It's not your rabbi's. It's you and the mother of your children. And if you both can try to work towards, of course you can have differences of opinion of what's best for the kids. That's fair, reasonable, and normal. But if you stop and think about who are we trying to help, it could make all the difference in the world. Do you know how I know it? From my personal experience as a child. I didn't plan this talk. I'm speaking to you. I wrote, no anger, no judgment. I'm speaking from my heart. I've said a lot of things in anger about this subject. Now I'm just speaking from my heart. Do you know how I know this? Because I was blessed to be raised in a home where both of my parents kept the interest of the children first. My father died when I was 3. My mother remarried 2 years later. And she and Abba, we didn't use the word step in our family. She and the wonderful man she married, he had a child from a first marriage. There were 3 of us. My parents together had a child. And they raised the 5 of us completely as equals, with love, with respect. And people ask me how my parents did it. And I always say that they had one question. I believe that I never really discussed it with them. You can, if you're interested, you can look up some things that I wrote about them. All 3 parents, there are a number of articles that I wrote about them. Parenthetically, I have such gratitude to my non-biological father. I light 3 Yartzeit Licht every year, every Yom Tov. I observe his Shiva just like my father's. Why? Because this is what I learned. Because my parents taught us that family is everything, and they will set aside their own feelings to make the children comfortable and to see that that we have a stable home. And I had a very challenging adolescence. I'm not here to vent, God forbid. I was a restless kid. I didn't do well in school. I was very angry at God that he took my father. It's still a sore subject in my relationship with him. And at the time, I call it history's verdict. And this is one thing that might come across as harsh, but this is how I feel. I call it history's verdict. Right now, when you're in the thick of things, there's a lot going on. The emotions are swirling, and you might not see things the way your children will see things when they're growing up. You know what I tell parents who are fighting around in court? I'm not even talking about not giving a get, who are in the middle of, really court battles. Those that I've sat down with over the years, who came to me together for advice that we were fighting, can you help us? We were quarreling around in court. You know what I tell them? How old are your kids? Usually the children are, generally speaking, preteens or younger, and sometimes it's older, but that's usually the way it is. And I tell them, what do you tell your 7-year-old when they come home, or 9-year-old when they come home and say everybody's talking that, you're in court or whatever it is? Imagine what it's like for a kid. That's your customer. Could you imagine what it's like for a child to know that the parents are fighting with each other? And everything's public today. So I tell both parents, and if one parent speaks to me, I tell him or her. I say, call in a 20-year-old and make believe that that's your child 15 years from now. And now explain to him or her why you're fighting in court. Think about that for a while. Think about that. Whatever you're doing now is going to reverberate for years, for generations perhaps. I'm turning 65 next month. I make so many decisions today based on the incredible example that I learned from my parents. The reason that I felt 20 years before was popular that parents shouldn't send children who are non-observant away from home. And my feelings about parents with LGBTQ kids today, it comes from my home, because our parents did everything possible to make us feel comfortable and to see that Our lives should be as stable as possible. So if you asked me at the time at 15 what I thought about, Abba, he was a wonderful man. It's not his fault. I wanted my father back. But now, nothing but gratitude. The deepest, most profound gratitude. Because when I was vulnerable, he had my back. And my mother had my back. And my father's family, my father, and my biological father, his family had my back at Yom Tov. And I'm grateful to each one of them. And that's how we Uri and I try to raise our children, that it's family first. So, what do you do when you're filled with rage and you're ready to thrash out? I tell parents that this is like the last 2, I don't know if you follow sports, but I tell parents that this is like the last 2 minutes of a football game. People are playing in a Super Bowl and a championship game, and the last two minutes, like, it happens so fast, and people talk about it 40 years later. Sports fans, and especially the people who played the game, they can tell you every move they made and every good thing they did, every mistake they made, because in the moment, the fans are screaming, they're rushing, there's such crazy going on. And the great athletes, the great quarterbacks, know how to slow their clock down and focus on what they need to do. I promise you, for good or for bad, what you're doing now, your children and grandchildren will judge you for the rest of their lives, long after you're gone, long after you left this world. Your children and grandchildren will remember if you treated them with their interest in mind. Mark my words. I've had many people ask me if they should say Kaddish for their parents. I'm not a posek, I send them to a rabbi. But people come and talk to me about these things. He wasn't there for me, she wasn't there for me, Doesn't mean it's all true, but that's the way people feel. So just remember that while this is going on, you're going to be judged for the rest of your life and their lives. And the gratitude that I feel to my parents, and especially my non-biological father, I can't even imagine how differently I would feel and how angry I would be if looking back I thought that they didn't have my interest in mind. So I'm pleading with you, think it over. Go to a wise person that you know, someone you trust. Talk it over. Go for therapy if you need to. I don't see how you could go through such a difficult situation and it's hard to sort this out by yourself. And if you're not comfortable going to a therapist, go to an older person that you respect and talk it over. Forget what everybody's, a lot of times people love to, unfortunately, there are very unethical people who love a good fight and will egg you on and, tell you stuff. Oh, they did this, you should do that. You give a get, something. They're not going to be there to clean up your mess. When you're my age and you're down in Florida and you're thinking over what you did in your life, they're not going to be there to help you. There's a book written by Viktor Frankl. He was a Holocaust survivor, a masterful book. And he had just a brilliant thought there. I found it, so I read it many times. I found it extremely meaningful. And he wrote there that between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies your freedom and growth. And what he said is that he wasn't going to let the Germans, the Nazis, dictate his humanity. They could force me to work all day. They could force me to sleep on a plank of wood. They could force me, to stand on roll calls for hours at a time. but they can't break my spirit. I get to respond to what they're doing. Between stimulus means something that happens to you, and response, there's a space. And in that space lies your freedom. So, whatever situation you're in now, there are many people involved in that. First and foremost, your spouse. Could be family members on your side, on her side, friends. Unfortunately, it does get very messy. And because, thank God, we have very close families and large families, it increases the likelihood that, that stuff happens. But you're in charge. You're in charge. What should you do if, I said at the beginning that I would address a very challenging question, which is, what do I do if they're not letting me see the children or other things like that, and the only weapon that I have is a get? I promise you that this is what I tell fathers. And again, I'm not saying you should listen. And I don't tell people what to do, but I tell them to consider doing something. That if you're at a point where you have a set of circumstances, let's say, and mothers do this, withhold custody from parents, sometimes for good reasons, like abuse or other things, and sometimes there are abuse allegations that might not have been true. It's complicated, of course, but you're in charge of how you respond. I'll tell you what I tell the fathers to do. I've had many, many fathers crying to me, and my heart breaks for them. I haven't seen my kids in years and whatever. And I tell them, I said, look, you basically have two choices. You can go fight in court, which you might not gain anything. You might gain everything. You might do something in between. But it's going to be messy for years. It'll cost you both hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's not an exaggeration. Every filing in court is $20,000, $10,000, $20,000. Or you could play the long game. And I tell them, I promise you, I wrote at the beginning, I'm going to speak exactly my truth. I stepped down from any organization I ever belonged to so that I have the liberty now to speak my mind, and I don't have to discuss it with anyone. And I love doing that. That's a gift, Baruch Hashem, that I gave myself, that I have total autonomy. This is just Yankee Horowitz. Nobody told me to say this. Nobody's whispering in my ear. This is just me. And here's what I tell the fathers. Open an account for your child, for each of the children. Deposit money on their birthdays. Write them letters. Back in the day, before there was email even. Write a letter, address it to yourself. Write a letter to your child. I miss you, darling. I'm so sorry I can't get to see you, but I don't want to do anything that's going to upset your stability. Mail it to yourself. Tell your spouse that you're doing this. That I'm not going to fight back because I don't want to disturb the children's lives. And I don't want to subject them to the humility of this. But one day, I'm going to show them these time-stamped letters. And they're going to find out that I'm a decent person. And I'm a loving father. And they're going to come back to you and ask you why you deprived me of my father. And I've seen this dozens of times where it totally flips. And the children are so angry at the parent who deprived them of the other parent. So I tell the fathers, look, I don't know, I'm not telling you what to do, it's not my business. I just want to suggest a strategy. And in short term, it's Gehenna, it's hell. So you can take it or leave it. But I can tell you this much. Continuing down this path, of fighting and withholding a get, I don't think will gain you anything. Sometimes when you see the public, protests or ganging up against you or feeling, besieged, you tend to, dig your feet in and say, I'm not giving in, and that's it. You can do that. You can do that. I don't think it's going to advance your agenda. It certainly won't advance your agenda if you're thinking about the children first. Here's another way of thinking about it, something I often tell parents when there's quarreling going on. I say, imagine if you had to leave your children. Let's say a couple has to leave their children. They hire a nanny. They hire someone to raise the children. Wouldn't you want that person to be calm? Wouldn't you want that person to be relaxed and focused on your children? So I say, when you're doing all of this and fighting around in court and not giving a get and having agita again and again every single day, what do you think that does to the quality of parenting your children are getting? Shouldn't you want their mother to be calm and raise them well? They're your kids. All I can do is plead with you for this time, without anger, just from my heart. I've seen so much in my almost 65 years in this world. Ironically, if you want to look it up on Facebook, Rabbi Yisrael Motzen, who's a rabbi here in Baltimore, I went for a walk with my wife this morning. We took a long trail, and he was jogging the other way, and he posted that he sees me. He saw me, and I always have a smile on my face. That's what he said. I always have a smile on my face, even though I listen to a lot of aggravation, and I do listen to, they have like dog years. I've listened to thousands of years of a normal lifetime. What a normal person, tsaras and problems and stuff. I sometimes feel like I'm 400 years old, living with what I live with. Not live with me, I mean listening to things. I love my life. I enjoy every single moment. But there's a lot that I see. And I've seen so many children that were robbed of this stability during their younger years. And the rage, they have no place to put it. And very often they take it in and lash out at anyone. With two wonderful parents, I thrashed around till I was 16. I wasn't ready to settle down. And then just one day, I stopped thrashing and said, that's it. I want to build my life. Excuse me. I'm debating whether I should say the last thing, and I will, because that's my nature. Forgive me if it sounds harsh. I said I wouldn't say anything harsh. When I speak to parents who are quarreling with each other, especially nasty stuff in court, I have the freedom to say what I want. I'm not a therapist. People come to me for advice. They don't have to listen if they don't like it. But I always beg parents to mediate it out. One more time, I'll promise you this is exactly what I say. And I want this to be the last thing I say in this talk. If any of you want to contact me, you can message me on social media. I can't promise you that I have time to respond right away, but I'll do my very best, maybe to do another live. I don't have the time or the capacity to get involved in mediation. I don't want to lead you on and think that that's something that I can do. I cannot at this stage of my life. I want to close with this. I'll tell you what I tell parents who say it's impossible, we can't talk to each other. Whenever we talk, there's a fight. I promise you this is what I tell them. I say, mark my words, there will come a day that you two will sit down and talk to each other civilly, with respect and decency. Do you know where? Not in good places. Because your children, you're tearing their hearts out with this fighting. You're eviscerating their stability. So they're going to do anything possible to get you to talk to each other. I promise you this is what I say. You might meet in a jail, bailing your kid out. You might meet to decide which facility to take your kid in for substance abusing. You might meet in a morgue. I promise you that the vast, overwhelming majority of situations, the parents have to talk to each other at one point because the kids force it on them. I beg you, I wrote an article called, I posted it on social media today on Instagram. I wrote it in Mishpacha magazine in 2009. It's called Father of the Man. I wrote a different version in the Times of Israel that you could look up and say, please don't orphan your children. That's what you're doing. You're making your children orphans. Especially if you're withholding a get, you're making your children orphans. And I wrote in the piece, Hashem, in his great wisdom, took my father away. Nobody in this world has a right to make a child an orphan. That's why I feel so passionate about this. And I'm telling you the truth, that as an orphan, I had it better than kids who grow up in homes where people fight. I wrote it in the article. You can look it up. Because everywhere I went, people stopped me and told me how wonderful my father was and how much they miss him. My father's friends used to do it all the time. What are your kids listening to when you're fighting around like this? So you're angry that there's a protest outside your house. I know you're thinking about yourself. How dare you do this? What do you think your kids are thinking? Please stop this. What do you think your kids are thinking right now? Like, what do you think your kids are thinking? What do you think, I said it, what do you think they're going to think when they're 15 and 25 and 35 and 55? I beg you, I wrote in the piece, please remove the sword of the Malach HaMavis from your hands. I ended the article like this. I wrote, I had the child in me speak like I'm speaking tonight. And I said that, listen to little Yankee now, meaning the child in me speaking, or, God forbid, you're going to wind up going to people like me who deal with teens at risk in the worst agony imaginable. Hell had opened up that this fighting started. Listen to little Yankee. It's a lot more pleasant than finding a big Yankee later on. I hope you accept my words the way I said them. I would say with love, but with empathy and compassion. And try to work things out to make kids better, that make life better for your children. Thank you very much.